How many men have you slept with, Diane? How many Arab men? What profanity have you done and then hid it from me?
Michael's voice was low, flat, and cruel in its calm. The same voice he used every night at the dinner table to pray over their food, now aimed at his own wife like an accusation with no evidence behind it, except a story that was never even about her. Diane had reached for him a minute earlier, desperate, pleading for her marriage. He pulled away from her hands like they were something contaminated. 14 days later, Diane would be sitting on the edge of her childhood bed, a suitcase still half-zipped in the corner, a phone that had not rung once. But to understand how one moment of pillow talk could undo more than a decade of perfect silence, we have to go back much further than that Tuesday night in Houston. We have to go back to two girls, 7 years old, sharing a single mango on a compound wall. Before we go further, if this story hits you, subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Diane Mensah and Linda Asante grew up on the same narrow street in a Kumasi suburb, daughters of families who shared a borehole, a church pew, and eventually, every secret either girl was too afraid to carry alone. They started primary school on the same day, sharing a desk because the class was short one chair, and by the time they finished secondary school, nobody in the neighborhood referred to one without the other. They were, for all practical purposes, sisters who happened to be born to different mothers. Their 20s did not go the way either of their parents had hoped. Ghana's economy in those years was unkind to two young women with secondary school certificates and no clear path forward. And both Diane and Linda drifted, for a stretch of years neither of them speaks about proudly now, into a life their mothers would have wept over if they had known the full extent of it. Nightclubs in Accra, older men with money and no interest in commitment, a revolving cast of contacts who always seemed to know someone who could get you a job, a visa, a way out, for a price or a favor or something else entirely. Diane drank more than she should have, dated men she should not have, and let more than one relationship go further than it should have out of loneliness or need. But there was always a line she did not cross, some instinct or luck or grace that kept her a half step back from the edge Linda eventually walked straight over.
For Linda, the pressure was heavier. Her father was sick, her mother's small shop was failing, and when a woman she had met through that same secular circle of contacts offered her a chance to work abroad in Qatar, the money on the table was more than her whole family could otherwise see in 10 years. She did not tell her parents what the work actually turned out to be. She told Diane. There was one night, not long before Linda left for DOHA, that Diane still thinks about more than almost any other memory from those years. A man at a club in Osu had offered both of them a way into exactly the kind of arrangement that would later carry Linda across an ocean. Good money, a private jet, wealthy men who paid extravagant sums for things, sexual acts that are better left unmentioned, no questions asked. Linda looked at Diane that night with something between an invitation and a warning in her eyes. Diane said no. She still could not entirely explain, even now, why that particular night was the one where her nerve finally failed her and Linda's held. Whether it was fear or luck or some quieter voice she was too proud to call faith yet. She went home. Linda stayed a while longer, and 3 months later, she was on a private jet to Doha. Diane was the only person Linda told in real time over the 2 months it was happening. Long, static-filled international calls where Linda would go quiet for entire minutes before finding the words for what she needed to say. Diane listened to it all, every call, carrying details she has still, to this day, never repeated to another living soul before the night that changed everything. She sent Linda encouraging texts at odd hours. She was, across an ocean, the one steady hand Linda had to hold on to. This is the part that makes what happened later so much harder to understand. Diane did not fail to keep a secret she barely understood. She broke a secret she had guarded perfectly at real personal cost for more than 10 years. Both women eventually found their way out of that chapter of their lives, though it happened differently for each of them. For Linda, it was the day she finally boarded a flight home from Qatar for good, carrying 2 months of saved money and a version of herself she barely recognized. For Diane, it was watching what Qatar had cost her best friend up close, even from a distance, and understanding with sudden clarity exactly how much further down that road she herself could have gone. The two of them sat together on that same compound wall where they'd once shared mangoes as girls, 3 weeks after Linda's return, saying very little at first. It was Linda who finally spoke. "I don't want to be that person anymore," she said. "Any version of her, not even the one before DOHA." Diane took her hand and said the only thing that felt true. "Then we won't be, both of us, starting now." It was not a dramatic vow, not the kind you would find in a film. It was two exhausted young women making a quiet, ordinary decision on a wall they had known their whole lives, and somehow, against the odds of how many such promises usually go, they actually kept it.
They started attending a small church in Adum together the following month, more out of desperation for a different life than any sudden burst of faith. And to their own surprise, the faith came anyway, slowly, the way most real things do. They immigrated to the United States within 18 months of each other, both landing eventually in Houston, both finding their footing in the same Ghanaian church fellowship that had first been a refuge back home. It was there, rebuilt, respectable, and genuinely changed, that Diane met Michael and Linda met Richard. Diane married Michael Antwi 6 years ago. He had noticed her at a fellowship picnic long before he worked up the courage to speak to her, drawn, he told her later, to the particular way she organized the food table without being asked, calm and capable in a way he found more attractive than anything else in the room. Their courtship had been slow and deliberate by design, both of them, in their own ways, trying to build something steadier than what either had known before. He was a steady, church-going man who worked in logistics, prayed over every meal like he meant every word of it, and had a reputation in their fellowship for the kind of man other men went to for advice. He knew, in the broadest terms, that Diane had lived a little before finding her faith. She had told him that much, in the honest, general way people confess a past they've made peace with. He did not know the specifics. He certainly did not know about Linda's 2 months in DOHA, and Diane had never once considered telling him. That story had never been hers to tell. Linda married Richard Boating 4 years ago, a Ghanaian British man she had met through a cousin's introduction at a wedding in London. For 2 years, she and Richard had been working through the long, anxious paperwork of her green card, the kind of process where every gap in your history can be asked about, examined, and quietly judged by a stranger behind a desk. Richard knew nothing of DOHA at all. As far as he understood, his wife's past before him was simply ordinary, a hard young adulthood in Ghana, nothing more. Now here is where a past both women thought had been fully closed came knocking on an evening that started like any other. Linda was folding laundry when the email arrived. The address made her stomach drop before she had even read a single word. An old contact from DOHA, resurfacing with the casual confidence of a person who assumed the past never really closes its accounts. The message was brief and businesslike in its obscenity, an offer of $40,000 for her to return and do it all over again, framed as though it was simply a job opportunity, as though the years in between had not happened at all. Linda's hands were shaking so badly, it took her 3 attempts to block the email address. She sat down hard on the edge of her bed, laundry forgotten on the floor, and called the one person on earth who had already carried this weight with her once before and had never once let her carry it alone. Diane listened for 40 minutes, the way she always had, through tears and long pauses. This was not a new story unfolding for the first time. It was an old wound Diane already understood completely, reopened without warning, and by the end of the call, Linda felt something close to steady again. Diane had, after all, lived alongside this exact fear before, 10 years earlier, on the other end of those same long-distance calls from DOHA. That should have been the end of it, the way it had always been the end of it before. A weight the two of them carried together, quietly, the way they always had. It was not. That same night, lying in bed beside Michael in the dark, something in Diane finally gave way under a weight she had been carrying mostly alone for over a decade. Michael asked why she seemed so far away, so unlike herself, and Diane, exhausted in a way that went bone deep and worn down by 10 years of guarding a secret that was never hers to guard forever, told him. "You will not believe what happened to Linda today," she began, and the rest came out of her almost against her own will, like a dam finally giving after years of holding steady against pressure nobody else could see. She told him about Qatar, about the men, in the vaguest terms she could manage, because even after everything, it still felt wrong to say more. About the $40,000 email, about the 2 months of long-distance calls she had carried alone as a young woman, telling no one, not even her own mother. "Wait," Michael said, sitting up. "You knew about this the whole time? Since you even met me?" "She's my sister, Michael. Not by blood, but in every way that matters. I couldn't tell anyone. I promised her." "And you never told me? In 6 years?" "It was never mine to tell." He went quiet after that, and Diane, 10 years of held breath finally released, mistook his stillness for understanding. She fell asleep first, her hand resting on his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow toward what she assumed was sleep. She did not see his face in the dark, jaw tightening, turning over not just Linda's story, but the sudden, unsettling discovery that his own wife had been capable of a decade of silence he had never once suspected. She was wrong to believe he understood, and the cost of that misjudgment arrived faster than either of them could imagine. Michael did not stay quiet with what he had heard. Sometime before dawn, unable to sleep, he made a decision he would later defend as simply being honest between men. He picked up his phone and called Richard, who happened to be one of his own close friends from the same fellowship. Richard answered groggy, confused by the early hour, and within minutes, Michael had repeated every detail Linda had trusted to exactly one person in the entire world, and Diane had trusted to protect for 10 years. Here is where one phone call became the hinge 2 marriages would swing shut on. Richard listened, thanked Michael quietly, and hung up. Then he sat alone in his kitchen until the sun came up, feeling something in his chest curdle that he did not yet have words for. By 8 that morning, Richard was on the phone with his immigration lawyer, a woman named Patricia, who had walked them through 18 months of paperwork with what had always felt like genuine warmth. "I need you to pause the filing," Richard said, his voice unnervingly steady. "Today." "But Richard, we're 3 weeks from the interview. Is something wrong? Is Linda all right?" "Just pause it," he said again. "I'll explain when I can." He never fully did explain. Not to Patricia, not to anyone. He simply halted the green card filing he and Linda had spent 2 years carefully building, piece by piece, without once asking her side, without once asking what circumstances had put a young woman with no other options on a plane to DOHA in the first place. It would be easy to make Richard the villain of this story and leave it there. But sitting in that kitchen, turning the details over, he was not thinking like a cruel man. He was thinking like a frightened one. Frightened of what his own community would say if this ever became known. Frightened that the reputation his consulting business depended on could not survive being attached, even by marriage, to something this scandalous. Frightened, underneath all of it, that the woman he loved had let him build a whole shared life on a version of her past that was not true. None of that made the phone call fair, but it made it human, which is somehow worse to sit with than if he had simply been cruel for no reason at all. Linda's fear from that morning onward was not abstract. It was the fear of a knock on the door. She stopped going to the grocery store alone, asking a cousin to pick up what she needed instead. She kept her phone charged at all times, a small overnight bag packed by the door out of some instinct she couldn't fully explain, as though readiness alone might soften whatever was coming. She barely slept, and when she did, she dreamt not of DOHA, but of Richard's face the morning after Michael's call. Not angry, which she could have understood, but simply quietly finished with her in a way that frightened her more than anger ever could have. She sat in her car outside the house one afternoon for nearly an hour, unable to make herself go inside because Richard's car was in the driveway, and she no longer knew which version of him would be waiting behind the door. She called Diane that afternoon. This time, there was no careful, trusting quiet in her voice. There was only screaming and cursing, and the particular kind of grief that comes from realizing the one person who had kept your secret safe for 10 years had finally, in a single unguarded night, let it go. "You held this for 10 years, Linda," before the line went dead. 10 years, Diane. Why now? Diane did not have an answer that felt like enough, even to herself.
Here is where the story turned in a direction nobody had prepared for, including Diane herself. When Diane hung up the phone, shaking, she turned to Michael, expecting comfort. Instead, Michael looked at her the way you look at something you no longer fully recognize. He did not comfort her. He interrogated her, demanding to know exactly how many men she herself had been with back in those years. How many Arab men? How many married men? As though Linda's specific past were somehow evidence against Diane's own character. As though a decade of loyal secret-keeping made her guilty of everything she had kept. It was not an entirely baseless accusation, and that is what made it cut so deep. Diane did have her own chapter of recklessness in her 20s, one she had told Michael about only in the vaguest, softened terms, nothing close to what Linda had endured, but far from the picture of composed stability he had always assumed he'd married. Michael was not wrong that there was more to his wife's past than he knew. He was wrong, completely and unfairly, to treat that unknown past as though it were the same story as his friends' wives. When Diane reached for him, desperate, pleading for her marriage, he pulled away in disgust and told her never to touch him again. Diane packed a bag 3 days later. Her mother answered the phone from Kumasi, already crying before Diane had finished the first sentence. "Come home," her mother said simply. "We will figure out the rest after you are here." Her parents were waiting at the airport with a look on their faces Diane remembered from childhood. Her father, a quiet man who rarely offered advice unless directly asked, said only one thing on the drive home. "Some doors, once you open them, close whether you want them to or not. It is not always fair. It is simply true." Later that first week, sitting with her on the porch after her mother had gone to bed, he said more. He had been a young man once with a friend's secret in his hands, he told her. Nothing so heavy as this, but heavy enough at the time. He had let it slip to someone he trusted, and it cost him that friendship for 11 years, until the two men made peace at a funeral, too late to get the years back. A secret is not yours to spend just because someone trusted you with it. Trust is not a gift you get to re-gift. I learned that the hard way too. You are not the first person in this family to learn it, and I doubt it will be the last if I'm honest with you.
On her 9th day home, Diane walked to Kejetia Market with her mother, mostly to remember what it felt like to move through the world without checking her phone every few minutes. Along the way, her mother finally asked the question she had been holding back all week. "Did you know about Linda all those years?" Diane nodded, bracing for judgment that never came. Her mother simply squeezed her hand. "Then you carried something very heavy for a very long time for someone you love. That is not nothing, even now. It does not undo what happened this last time, but it is not nothing." It was the first time Diane had cried without also feeling ashamed of the tears. She ran into Efua, an old secondary school classmate she had not seen in over a decade, now running a fabric store 3 rows from where they used to buy roasted plantains as girls. A street, Diane realized, with a small ache, not far at all from the compound wall where she and Linda had once made their quiet pact to leave the old life behind for good. Efua did not know anything about Houston or Michael or Linda's past. She simply saw an old friend, pulled her into a hug that smelled like fresh kente dye, and spent 20 minutes catching her up on people from their old class. For 20 minutes, Diane was simply Diane, home for a visit. It was the first time in 2 weeks her chest had not felt like it was being sat on.
It has been 2 weeks now. Diane still sleeps in her childhood bedroom, in a house that fits her differently than it did over a decade ago. Michael has not called once. Her texts sit there, delivered, then eventually not even delivered as read at all. Linda, as far as Diane knows, is still in Houston, still undocumented, still waiting to find out whether her own husband's anger will cool into forgiveness or harden into something far worse. The 2 women who once shared a single mango on a compound wall, who survived DOHA together across a phone line, who made a pact to change their lives and kept it for over a decade, have not spoken since the screaming. Diane has tried calling twice. Both times, it rang out unanswered. The second, older, deeper friendship, this whole story quietly ended, sitting right alongside the marriage. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments what you think Diane should do next. Try to win Michael back? Reach out to Linda one more time? Or start over completely on her own terms? And if you have not subscribed yet, this is the moment. We tell the stories that matter, one honest night at a time. Subscribe and let's keep going.